It's always good to have a good warm-up guy, isn't it? Right. So welcome to week 3, whether you're online and joining us or whether you're here in the building together. It's good to do an ever so slight recap, not a big recap, otherwise you get bogged down, and that happens to me too often. But just to fill in exactly where we are. If you remember that the word revelation literally means the unveiling. So it's not meant to hide things, but to reveal them. However, to our simplistic minds, sometimes we want it very, very easy. But what John is doing isn't easy. And that's principally because he's revealing things with symbols. So he's constantly going into the Old Testament. He's constantly referencing things, and he expects people to do the work. Now, of course, it's harder for us because it would have been natural in those days. So when he's talking about the golden lampstand, everybody would have immediately thought of a particular prophet. When he's talking about the sea and beasts from the sea, they would automatically have understood the language that he's talking about. But we are, as we have said over and over, 2,000 years and 2,000 miles away from John. And because of that, we've got a little bit more work to do to make sure that we can catch up with the things that he's alluding to. And it's important that we understand that. But if we do the work, I've got to say that it's a wonderful book. But we must also remember that we are not the original audience. Although it is for us as well, and for Christians living through terrible times throughout the whole of history. And it's important that we understand that. This 2,000 years, sometimes, and I suppose it's the same for every generation, we become arrogant because we can't imagine a future generation to us. And so we always think that we are in the last of the last days. Now, one generation will be correct, but maybe not ours. But very maybe there will be ours. And events are unfolding around about us, and they're very exciting and terrifying at the same time. But let's remember that there's been many before us who have been absolutely convinced of the fact that they were living in the end times, but they weren't. Are we all okay with that? So we need to think about what it is that this book, if you like, does for us. And it's simply this: God wins. And because God wins, we will win too, if we are faithful. And that's the message right through Revelation. We are more than conquerors in Christ as long as we are faithful. To the letters to the churches, there's some praise for the things you're doing right. There's some hard words for the things you're doing wrong. And then in the middle of those hard words, we have the command to change and be different and to start doing the things that are right and not the things that are wrong. Yes? And if we do that and we take that message for us too, then all will be well. But when we say all will be well, it doesn't mean to say all things will be easy. Just that all things will be well. So here's the question: why are you here tonight? Why are you watching this online? Why is it that you're on YouTube watching this particular topic? And it may well be that there's a number of reasons. You might have stumbled across it by accident, in which case it's great. It may be because you have a general interest. But I suspect many people will be driven by the fact that they desperately want to know what the news is going to be like tomorrow night. When they tune into the BBC or Sky News or GB News or whoever, they want to be able to have a handle on where they are. And it's a natural feeling. Because this feeling that we are living in the end days, as I say, one generation will be right, and it might well be us. And because of that, naturally we feel when events are happening in Jerusalem, when events are happening in Israel in particular, we think to ourselves, is this it? And it's not a bad thing to think that, but it's bigger than that. Is that okay? It's bigger than that. So we read it and study it in order to become more faithful, more determined, and more committed. Are we okay with that? And if that's your motivation in this, then that is great. We study it in order to become more faithful, more determined, and more committed. And if we try and just do it as a roadmap to the news, we will probably be wrong. And Revelation is a prophecy given to warn and to comfort God's people. And I want you to remember that they were real people that John knew. So when Jesus is saying, write to the angel of the church of Ephesus and give this message to the church, you've lost your first love. John must have gone, ouch, because he's the minister of the church. And when particular things are said to particular people in those churches, John must have been, I can't imagine how he felt, to be honest. A new wave of persecution had started under Domitian, and wholesale slaughter of Christians was taking place in the games. We want to know what it's like to be the original audience or the original readers or hearers of the book of Revelation. Then put yourself in the place of people who are being pointed at in the street and decried as being a Christian, and then either had to do one of two things. Either give in, claim that Caesar is Lord, in which case you'd be fine as far as the world's concerned, but have put yourself into an unfaithful position towards God. Or be faithful to God, and then the next thing would happen, you'd find yourself in the Colosseum. Now, one person who's a bit later than this, but he knew John. In fact, he was a young man who was a follower of John when John was an old man. But Polycarp was born in 69 AD. So he was probably, late 20s, perhaps hitting 30 at this point. And at 85, he dies in the arena, bound, partially burned at the stake, and then stabbed. And I'm sure the words that were ringing in his ears were the words to the church of Smyrna. Why? Because he was the pastor of the church. He was the leader of the church in Smyrna. So I want you to understand that these original hearers and readers of this word were very personally entwined. Knew John. John knew them. And some of them would have taken these words to their heart and lived by them and been prepared to die by them. Now, it's fashionable today to turn around and say, did really Christians die in the arena? The answer is yes. If you want to see some of the Roman mosaics, I can show you two. Christians were put to the sword, tied to stakes, burnt, eaten alive by lions, tigers, and leopards. Actually, I've said tigers, But that might be, I'm not too sure whether they had tigers over from India then, I don't know. But certainly lions and leopards. And here's some actual mosaics from Rome of the time. And they're rather graphic. But not only graphic, you just do get the feeling of what it would be like. And my lovely wife, bless her, has always felt she's got such an affinity with big cats that she could walk into an arena and the cats would come and just gently cuddle up and she'd be safe. She obviously read Daniel in the Lion's Den when she was 3, and it imprinted deeply in her psyche. But certainly from what we've seen of these graphics, maybe that wouldn't have been the outcome you hoped for. Okay, a couple of things we missed from last time. In fact, I've been racking my brains trying to figure out whether I missed them. If I had hit them, I'm doing them very quickly. You can just pick up on it. I believe I turned around last time and said when we talked about the thrones, we're not going to do it again, but in chapter 4 we talked about the 24 elders. And I just wanted to find two references to show that these were contemporary. What I mean before Revelation, they are thrones and powers, if you like. From what Paul is saying, in the dark side of the world, the dark spiritual forces, there are thrones and powers. And whether these thrones once occupied the council of God, we don't know. But Paul refers to these thrones and powers, and I didn't have the reference. I might be mistaken, but it's 1 Colossians and 1:16. I don't think I quoted that last time. And Matthew, of course, said to the disciples, you will also sit on 12 thrones, which is interesting, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. It does lead you to sort of slightly wonder. I know it's a semi-tangent, but I'm here. The 12 apostles, 11's not a problem. Yeah. Obviously, Judas is not going to be sitting on the throne. Who's the other one? At one level, we turned around and said, well, they chose lots, didn't they? And they chose Matthias to do it. But then you wonder really whether he was just keeping the seat warm for Paul. I don't know what opinion you have on that. I oscillate between thinking about that. Going back to Revelation 4, I said we'd pick this one up. The burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God. And we are going to deal with this as a separate subject, but we're not going to do it tonight. I'm going to kick that one further down the road again. For a reason, I want to deal with all the mentions of it and spot the mention of it tonight. And we'll get all the mentions out, and then we can collate them together, which I think will work a bit better. One of the other things I wanted to just mention, I don't know whether I mentioned it last time, was before the throne of God, there was, as it were, a sea of glass, like crystal. And I can't remember whether I mentioned, but in Exodus 24, we see that because Moses and Aaron and the others and the 70 elders go up and they see the God of Israel, and under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright, as blue as the sky. I don't know if you've seen that before, but every time that presence of the throne of God's mentioned, we see this pavement or glass area, bright blue, in front of the throne. And of course, who was on that throne? No man's seen God at any time, so we know who was sitting on that throne was the Son. Remember the whole 2 powers argument, the 2 Yahwehs, the visible Yahweh and the invisible Yahweh. And then in Ezekiel, we find the same thing over the vault of their heads. They look like the throne of lapis lazuli. High above the throne there's a figure like that of a man. And again, we find that and have to consider those. And the reason I'm saying that, John is clearly picking up on the Old Testament. He's clearly, in his description, either confirming, if you like, what they saw, or, he's using that to describe this throne of God that he sees. So let me start to read to you. Then I saw, in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne, a scroll written within. So if it's written on within, can you read it? No. You can't read what's inside. Yes? Important. And sealed with 7 seals. So these seals run along the top of the scroll. I'll show you a picture in a few minutes. And it's important to see the scroll like that. I don't know why, but when I was younger, I had this idea there was like a little bit of it rolled up and then a seal on it. And then rolled up a little bit more and another seal. You with me? But this is a clear description. It's written on the inside, and on the back it's sealed with 7 seals. So the seal's all on the back, not on the inside. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals?" Now, there's a huge amount that we could talk about as we go through. And I've got to be strict with myself and not let myself pick up on a lot of this. But if you do have questions, whether it's after the meeting or whether it's private, you want to email or contact me, whatever, I'll be more than happy to enter in a discussion with people. And it said, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its seals." So who's able to open the scroll? Oh no, nobody can open the scroll. But now, the voice says, "Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of Judah, Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, the precursor of David himself." And of course, the language that's used here is conquering military might. It's the Lion of Judah. And if you noticed from the previous, it says that he heard this voice say this. So imagine you're standing there, you're John, you hear this voice say, "The Lion of Judah, the conqueror. He can open the scroll and 7 seals." And then he turns and he sees just how this conquering has been done. And friends, what a juxtaposition. What an absolute about face. Because the Lion, the conqueror, but now it says, between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing, as though it had been slain, with 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent out into all the earth. You can shout at me if you want. I said tonight we're going to find another reference to the 7 spirits of God. It's here. Just checking to see whether you're still with me. But isn't that amazing? How has the conquering been done? We have a blood-stained lamb. But friends, this isn't a lamb that's been stained with the blood of those it's conquered. Stained with its own blood. How counterintuitive can you get? How do you win? You win by love. You win by self-sacrifice. You win by not loving your life at all costs. Jesus said, if you love your life, you will lose it. But if you're prepared to give it up for my sake, you will win. What a message to these people about to die. What a message to those like Polycarp, who goes willingly. The one thing some of these writers are right about, some of the Christians didn't get thrown in fear and tremble. Fear and tremble? Fear and trembling. They ran in, wanting to be martyrs for their Lord and King. I'm a coward. My natural instinct. Well, I'm schizophrenic, I suppose. I oscillate between being a coward and then too bombastic, and you're looking at me, that sort of instinct, I suppose. But these people who are going into the arena have read this letter. These people going into the arena have understood how you win. And you win by not worrying about losing. You win by not loving your life till death. Do you know why they stopped killing Christians in the arena? Just as a matter of interest. Maybe, yeah, I'm sure that is true. It wasn't fun. The audiences would get up and leave because the Christians were, that's my throat. They were like my wife, But that's it. They were, I am prepared to die for Christ. Real martyrdom. Not a martyrdom that presses a button and blows themselves up. But given their life out of love. Given their life out of wanting to save other people. Not to bring them down. And they won. And the arena was closed. Because it was no fun killing Christians who were prepared to die. Jesus wins. The Lamb through self-sacrifice. And for us, and as I say, if the message you've come to hear is, what's the news like for tomorrow? I've got a bigger message. Whatever comes next, be faithful, even if it means death. Their challenge was compromise or faithfulness. They were challenged by death and they were overcomers. To be blunt, our problems is we challenged by luxury and a compromise. This letter was meant to be a comfort to those, but I reckon it's a challenge and a warning to us. So this is anchored in John's time and place and audience, yes. But it's also true, that it needs to stiffen our resolve in our hearts. It means that we should become more passionate about who we are in Christ. It means that we should be prepared to be as faithful as those early Christians who were given everything. I don't think, unless this is the very end, I don't think we will be called upon in our lifetime. Well, I say that because I'm getting on. Maybe some of the younger ones here might. But in our lifetime, I doubt whether we'll be facing death. Unless it's the end, because things can move very quickly. But remember this. If you're still here, Greg, Emma, if you guys are here, in 30 years' time, and we've popped off, 40 years' time, and you are facing these moments, remember. Remember. This is how people get saved, by love. And he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. Who took the scroll? The Lamb. Now, how does he do that? With his mouth? You see where I'm going here? Remember, I said it was symbols. Right? John sees the Lamb, the slaughtered Lamb of God. But I'm sure that's wrapped in symbolism as well as truth. Jesus takes the scroll, and I'm sure he took it with his hand, because he's not a lamb in heaven. He might occasionally have the appearance of a lamb. You with me? Maybe we have moments where we perceive him as the lamb. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. It's interesting that the 4 living creatures fall down as well. And these 24 elders are holding, he went and took the scroll from the, I'll move back, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints, and they sang a new song. I'll just go back, if it can let me go back. The 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp. And if you want the imagery in the cartoons about playing harps in heaven, sitting on clouds, can you see how it sort of melds together in sort of, I'm sure Michelangelo's to blame. He probably had clouds and elders with harps on in the Sistine Chapel or something, and everyone thought, oh, that's heaven. Yeah, okay. And they also had golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Wow. I don't know how much of a bowl I'm filling. It might be the merest drop. But I want you to know something. Every time we pray, even so, Lord Jesus, come quickly. Every time we say the essence of the Lord's Prayer, I don't just repeat it parrot fashion. Come quickly, Lord. Yeah. Thy kingdom come. Those prayers are not wasted. Those words might drip like the dew onto heaven's fertile ground. I don't know, but what I'm saying is that every time you've prayed it and meant it, you are doing something in the heavenly realm. We're enjoined, Paul tells us, to pray for the coming of God. Pray for the coming of God. And when we pray, if we pray in faith, these drops will coalesce until these bowls are filled. I don't know the scale of things in heaven. I don't know whether the tiny little teacup bowls or whether the great big bowls that, I don't know. But I know this, the prayers of the saints are answered. The Lord isn't slow regarding his coming. He's merciful. But every prayer, thy kingdom come. Every prayer will be answered. And they sang a new song, saying, worthy are you to take the scroll and open its seals. For you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. And that includes Billingham. You've got funny accents. I know, because I can come from Merton. And you all sound slightly odd. Well, Dave, I mean, not being funny, but black country accents. By your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nations. And you have made them a kingdom. You are a kingdom. And priests to our God. And they shall reign on the earth. You belong a kingdom that's different from the one that's on your passport. We're not just citizens of heaven. We belong a royal kingdom. And we are priests unto God. And if we could only understand what it is that we shall be, how differently we would live our lives. The spring in our step would be different. The way we feel when we take our first look outside in the morning. Doesn't matter what you're looking at. It might be a grim view, it might be a wonderful view, it doesn't matter. But if we could only understand who we are in God. And then I looked and I heard around the throne and the living creatures and the elders and the voice of many angels numbering myriads of myriads. Does anybody know how many is in a myriad? It says there, does it? Oh, gosh. I think it sounds a wonderfully Welsh word. I'm sure it isn't. Myriads. Yeah. Myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. You just imagine that great crowd. Mm-hmm. Saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. I've got to say, I don't think that the book of Revelation is going to run in a linear fashion. What do I mean by that? I think it loops and loops and loops around, and I suspect I'm going to be here for this. I don't think that's going to be taking place in heaven while I'm down here, because this is the royal investiture of the Lamb. I know that the effect of the opening of the seals will have an effect upon the earth. I know that. But it doesn't mean to say they're linked in time between what's happening in heaven and what's happening on the earth. We've already mentioned 1,000 years for God is a day and a day is 1,000 years. We must think that Revelation is working in a different time scale to the way that we expect. And I don't know, but I can't give you a hard chapter and verse, so forgive me. When I'm speaking personally, I should make it very clear I'm speaking personally. But I would not be surprised to find that the church is part of that crowd singing that song to the Lamb at that moment when this investiture of the Lamb takes place. And what happens next, too. Because it says, I heard every creature in heaven, and on the earth, and under the earth, and in the sea, and all that is in them. Well, I guess that's going to include you and me, isn't it? It's pretty inclusive. So if that's the case, it can't be happening in this current dispensational age. Because if it was happening now, you'd hear everybody else around about you shouting what these are shouting. Is that right? So you understand my logic? Saying to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. And the 4 living creatures said, Amen. And the elders fell down and worshipped. Worthy are you to take the scroll and open the seal. Sorry, I've jumped backwards instead of forwards. And now we move into chapter 6. So let's understand what this unrolling of the scroll is all about. And the first 4 seals are about to be broken. And I believe we have to understand what this legal role of the sealed scroll is. Now, I've mentioned previously, why would you seal a scroll? We could do a quiz, a quick one. Why would you seal a scroll? Anybody?
You know when it's opened.
Sorry?
So that you know when it's opened.
So that you know when it's opened? Yes.
Only the person with the right to open it.
Yes. One of the things I mentioned that the normal practice would be 2 scrolls. One scroll is sealed and one scroll is unsealed. And the reason for that is that the sealed scroll is the formal legal document. The unsealed scroll tells you what's in it. So in other words, the equivalent of their solicitors could look at the unsealed scroll and said, this says that you owe him money and you've agreed to do this, that and the other. And yeah, I see all that. And then the formal moment comes when you break the seals and you check, yes, this is signed by both parties. And yes, it corresponds to that, and so they've got everything ready, the rubber stamp it, and then the transaction takes place. You get it? So, the scroll, we already know what's inside because we see it in Paul's writing, we see it in the teachings of Jesus, we see throughout the New Testament that there is going to be a bridal marriage between the church and Christ. We read that Christ has conquered powers, that he rules, that he's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But this is the formal legal document. Why? Because this is the moment when the possession of the earth is about to take place. The end has actually come. But it will be traumatic. As these seals are broken, the enemy will do everything to resist. And we come to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And we'll deal with them before we go and have a cup of coffee. And have a little, I can see you're getting desperate for your coffee, some of you. Bear with me. The 4 horsemen. People like drawing the art for these, don't they? Yeah. I'm sure they're completely wrong, but never mind. Revelation 6. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals. And I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, Come. And I looked, and behold, a white horse. And its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him. And he came out conquering and to conquer. What do we mean by conquering? This is not just war. When a country goes out to conquer another one, it is the building of an empire. It's taken over the other country. This is not a border skirmish. This is not a war between rival gangs. When it comes down to conquering, it's a different thing. And that is the first of the horses, a white horse, its rider with a bow and a crown, coming out to conquer. And when he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the people of the earth, so that the people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. And so, traditionally, this is regarded as the horseman of war, if you like. This is the actual, not just the conquering, but the actual battles taking place. And when he opened the third seal, I heard a third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." You'll notice that each of the living creatures is speaking what is happening to John as the seal is broken. He sees it, but the commentary is being given by the living creatures. And when he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked and beheld a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. And Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a quarter of the earth. Have you got that? A quarter of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. There's a bit that doesn't get mentioned very much. You mightn't know what it means now, but when it happens, you will. So here's the question. We're going to go into the break. Are these evil figures? These 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, are they evil figures? I will make a little note, because I was starting to look at all the Hollywood movies dealing with the end times. Because the word according to Hollywood is the end of the world is evil and must be stopped. Let's see where that point of view is coming from. So, what we're going to do is go into work groups while we're having a coffee. He's a hard taskmaster, isn't he? Yeah, making you work while you have coffee. It's outrageous. Sorry? Yeah, exactly. So, just for those at home, I'm going to put some of these readings up on the screen, and if you want to go through it, you can. But this is the book of Zechariah. And all I really wanted to do is pick 1 or 2 of the little readings and have a read and say, does that sound familiar? And if it is familiar, tell us why it's familiar. Is that all right? So it's nice and low-key. So do it in 2s or 3s or 4s. They're down the front. Come and take 2 sheets. Have a cup of coffee. Have 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, and we'll be back. And for those at home, I'll put the readings up there and come back after a coffee. There we go. Which is there. There's 2 sheets together. That's fine.
Just for the people watching at home, we will cycle through these because obviously there's more than one of them. So we'll put a few on it. We'll put it on for a few minutes, then we'll move on to the next one. So they'll keep changing during the time that we're on the break. So I will come and change them every couple of minutes, okay? And we'll give you a warning when we're coming back.
All the emeritus. Anyone left glasses? There's been sarcastic comments that all the ex-pastors or retired pastors are always the ones gassing. I'm sure that's not totally fair. It's true, it's just not totally fair. Well, I guess the reason we were looking at Zechariah, and we'll do it in greater detail at some point, but I just wanted you to see how much of the time John is actually drawing on the imagery from Zechariah. In fact, he probably uses Zechariah as much, if not more, than he uses Daniel. And there's all sorts in Zechariah. There's all sorts of odd things in it. But, I mean, just throw some things at me. Any significant things that you... So the lampstands and the bowls, yep.
Zechariah 6 has got the red horses and the white horses.
And the key thing is that not only are they there, but what role do they play? Their role is going out and reporting back to, like, the divine council, if you like, the events that are taking place. Now, when John sees the four horsemen of the apocalypse, he knows the book of Zechariah. You know, he's quoting from it or alluding to it over and over again. So it makes you stop and think for a second. You think, well, that becomes really, really interesting, because these horsemen of the apocalypse are always shown as some demonic characters, if you like. But actually, they're bringing about the will of God in judgment. So they are fearsome creatures, if you like. Whether they're just symbolic or real and actual, I don't know. But the key thing is that they come from other parts of the Old Testament. So, you know, in chapter 1, you've got an allusion to the horse, the man on the horse, and then you've got the chariots in between the mountains of bronze. And any other ones that you spotted that's really maybe made you sit up and think, good grief, yeah. What about the woman in the basket? Oh, hey, it's all strange, including the bits where the basket gets carried away by women who look like storks. So, yeah.
Me, I would say stop right straight away. I thought it was Moses. I don't know why.
I hadn't thought of that, I must confess. But certainly, if you think about later in Revelation and the character of the great whore in Babylon, Mystery Babylon, you can certainly see an allusion to that. I don't have any sheets left. They all went out, so I can't remind myself. Oh, bless you. Thank you very much. A gentleman. What about Zechariah 2, the measuring line? Does that ring any bells? We haven't come there yet in Revelation, but we're going to.
When the New Jerusalem comes down and they measure that.
Well, certainly John's going to refer to the measuring line and measure the temple, etc. Now, of course, Zechariah was a prophet who came back from Babylon, released by Darius, and came back and helped rebuild the walls and rebuild the temple. So, in one level, the measuring of the temple becomes the rebuilding of the second temple. Him and Haggai together are very important. And if you read the book of Zechariah, there's a character called Joshua the high priest, and he is a messianic character in his own right, although Some people might find that a little bit surprising. Zechariah 5, as I say, you have the woman in the basket the iniquity, if you like. We can talk about that later. The mountains of bronze and the horses, all the colours of what we've just seen. We also have a prophecy that I know some people major on about the shepherd who, the breaking of the staff union in Zechariah 11. And I'm going to raise a shepherd over the land who won't care for the lost, or seek the young, or heal the injured, or feed the healthy, but eat the meat of the choicest sheep. A worthless shepherd. And there's a prophecy in there. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. May his arm be completely withered, his right eye totally blinded. And I've read people into prophecy who try to project this on the Antichrist. So just bear in mind that's where it comes from. I'm not giving it credibility, but I'm saying it's in there. And if you look earlier than that, even Judas's role in there, the 30 pieces of silver, that's you'll find that. And in chapter 12, you'll see about looking upon the one that they pierced. So look, the point of this is John is using Zechariah a huge amount in what he does, and we will pick up on some of that. So what I want to go now is we have the loosening of these four horsemen. We have conquest. We have war. We have famine. And we have pestilence, wild animals, and death, all tied up together. And I want to just say that when we look at our newspapers today, it's not the end time prophecies coming true that will come true later on. We're only at the beginning of sorrows. But the sorrows are about to happen. So at this point in time, the real tribulation starts. And I just wanted to sort of do a contrast to where we are now before we start looking at next week exactly what will happen as these characters roll out. Now, what I'm going to suggest is that these loosening of these four horsemen, as I say, whether they are totally symbolic in summing up forces that are happening, or whether they have a realm, whether they're active agents on a different realm or not, I don't know. But what I am going to say is that all of these features, I think, will spread through the whole of that tribulation period. So it's not they're released and then we suddenly have a handful of incidents and then they don't play any more role. It's part of this looping that we're going to see. So it's easiest, I think, to imagine these being present through the whole of this tribulation period, and we will make reference to them time and time again as we unfold the events that are going to take place. So the great tribulation, the time of great sorrow on the earth. And I thought it wouldn't be a bad idea to look at how bad have things been, if you like, and look at these as headings. Now, I started off and I was going to try and figure out how many deaths have we seen by conquest. But of course it's hard to estimate because you've got to add together war and disease and famine to get a consolidated figure. So I haven't been able to do that, but I am going to give you specifics after this. What I would say, though, is that if you look at the power blocks that we have today, I'm not saying empires, I'm saying sort of empires, it might become pertinent later on. Because as the conquest takes place later, we find a number of empires or regions referred to. So, we have North America and South America. We have Europe and Russia. We have China, where you have India. We have the Middle East. We have Australasia, leading up into Indonesia, etc. We have Africa, and then we've got the stands. And by the stands, I mean those outside, technically, the Middle East, but Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that whole region that doesn't form any united front with India. And of course, it's cultural and religious divisions between the two. So you've got the Middle East and then you've got the stands. And they are separate because one is an Arabic people, largely in the Middle East, although they might have a shared religion with the stands. They're generally a different ethnic group and a different set. So I just want to point that out, because we will come back to that at some point. But death by war. The worst that's ever been was World War II. 80 million people died. But I've got to say, when we start looking at some of these figures, if you want to count it as percentage of population, some of the earlier things are much more dynamically worse. So, 1939 to 44, 80 million. But the Mongol invasions of 1251 to 53, in those few short years, 40 million people died. That's an amazing figure. War in the Three Kingdoms in China that took place in 220 AD, even less population, 38 million. 220 AD, 38 million. China, from the Ming dynasty to the Qing dynasty, I'm not confident enough to pronounce that with confidence, but 25 million, and that was in 1644. Spain's conquest of the Aztecs, they killed 24 million in the 1500s. And separately, they killed 8 million Incas. You know, we talk glibly about genocide today, and we forget the sensibilities of the past. What a terrible thing. And then for sheer length of time, the 100 Years' War, 3 million killed. And certainly if you look at the population of this country at that time, it's a very high proportion of what it could be. So is it fair to turn around and say that, you know, I have.
Because that was approximately 10 million.
It was, but it was basically because it fell so further down the list, and I wanted to, if I lumped together the Aztec and the Incas, it's so much more than World War I. But you're right, it's 10 million. No, I agree. I agree. I put the 100 Years' War in more for its longevity than its, because there's certainly a lot of other higher figures than the 100-Year War. But I guess where I'm coming from here is, it's very easy to think, oh, there's more war around today than there's ever been. No. No. There's not more people dying today through war than there's ever been. And by head of population, certainly not. Famine. One of the horsemen, the great Chinese famine, and again, I'm ashamed to admit that I wasn't aware of these. 3 Chinese famines with less than 100 years apart. 40 million in 1959, 25 million in 1906, 13 million in 1879. And of course, you can see every time there are famines, it becomes a driver for mass immigration or mass migration. And you see the Americas, in particular the Wild West, you know, the San Francisco, that coast. Huge amount of Chinese moving with that one in 1879. In India, in 1783, 25 million. In Bengal, 10 million. As recently as 1932 in the Russian and the Soviet era, 8 million. And the European famine, 7.5 million. Now, with television, and don't get me wrong, any famine's horrible. Any famine's terrible, and we should not have famine. But we have it. And trust me, when we look at what's going to happen in Revelation, we'll see more of it. But if you turn around and say, are we experiencing greater famines today than there's ever been? The answer is no. In fact, the poverty levels across the world have dropped radically. The world is far wealthier, far more able to feed itself. With all the talk about mass population, actually we're coping surprisingly well compared to the past. Famine. But disease.
But we're not feeding the people. It's going into animals, it's going into the wealthy people. You know, because there is big famines in the world.
There are big famines, but they're not of the scale that historically we've seen. And I'm not trying to be an apologist for it at all. I guess all I'm saying is, are there more famines today than there've been? And the answer to that question is no. Especially when you look at the population levels, going back to there. And as I said at the beginning, all famine's iniquitous. And we should be doing everything we can to stop it. But what I'm talking about is, if we have to measure these things, has it been worse in the past than it is now? And the answer indubitably is yes. Yeah.
I think everybody needs to become aware, because most people are not aware, every January the 27th, on so-called Holocaust Memorial Day, that the 40 million that you quoted, the statistic of the Chinese famine in 1959, most of that was completely deliberate.
Yes.
Because it was part of the at least 55 million people who were deliberately slaughtered during Mao Zedong's officially named, wait for it, deprivation of existence program, which might have deliberately killed up to 70 million people.
Of his own people.
Yes, and the 8 million that you quoted for the Soviet famine in 1932,
pales into
most of that,
Stalin.
well, most of that was deliberate, and that was part of the 25 million Holocaust in Joseph Stalin's Great Terror in the Soviet Union. Now, every January the 27th, people are commemorating the Holocaust. Now, without wishing to minimize that in any way, the 6 million that were deliberately slaughtered during that is not nearly as much as the 25 million who were deliberately slaughtered by Stalin, and the at least 55 million slaughtered by Mao Zedong. But because they were on the winning sides,
and write the history book,
their camps and their locations are not liberated, as was Auschwitz and Belsen and Dachau and all the rest of it. So most people are just not aware that on January the 27th, at least 80 million people who suffered in the two worst Holocausts of the 20th century are not remembered at all.
Yes. And that's not only fascinating, but you're quite right. I mean, it's inconceivable when you think about, even if you think about how Pol Pot looked at what Mao Zedong had done, and in Cambodia, percentage was, that's right, but the percentage per capita,
Very, very high percentage.
yes. I mean, just for those who don't know, I mean, in Cambodia, he wanted to have a year zero, and by a year zero, what he meant was he didn't want to have a history. So they could start fresh without any history, right? So declared year zero. Of course, to make that happen, all the history books had to be burned, and anybody who'd read the history books had to go as well. Anybody who wore glasses was killed, because it meant they could read, or it was presumed they could read. And 3 million people killed to wipe out anybody with any education. So the only people who were left were uneducated and therefore could believe anything. I mean, what Stalin did and what Mao Zedong did and what Pol Pot did, I mean, is astonishing. And you're right, those figures dwarf many of the conquests that were done in the name of empire. You know, the Mongol Empire or whatever. When you come to disease, the Black Death, not being funny, but we sometimes think we're living in the worst of times. The Black Death, the most fatal pandemic recorded in human history, caused the deaths between 75 and 200 million people. Half the population of Europe, the Middle East, Russia and China were killed in just 4 years. Now, don't get me wrong, COVID was horrible. COVID was not the Black Death. COVID was horrible and people died. The Great Flu of the 1920s killed between 50 and 100 million. People got it on the night, started to feel unwell, and within hours had died. There was a house that they went into where there was 4 people playing cards, and the people were still sitting with the cards in the hand, with rigor mortis had set in. It had killed them, hit them that fast and killed them that fast. They hadn't even dropped the cards. They were just literally dead where they were struck. It must have been almost like the angel of death passing overhead. So no, the north was virtually emptied, incidentally. If you look at, you've got Durham and York and Newcastle, Sunderland, all the villages were wiped out. There was nothing left in between them. And most of those cities were empty. Sorry, you're going to...
There's a massive gap, 75 to 200 million, and then 50 to 100. What happens to the bit in between? That's a massive...
It is. The problem, of course, is that when you get an estimate of 70 to 200 million and you're reaching between China over to Europe, how do you collate? All that could turn around and say from what investigations have taken place is that over half the population, but they didn't know what the population necessarily was to start with. But there are enormous figures. So yes, I believe we're living in the end times, and yes, I believe we have to be ready at all points for the end to come. And I believe the end is coming. But I don't think we can make the case that things are worse than they've ever been at the moment. Socially, there's some terrible things happening. Culturally, there's terrible things happening. But terrible things have always happened. If you go online, you can check earthquakes. Earthquakes have always happened. The current rate of earthquakes is not different to any that it's been in the last 1,000 years.
Because that's not the news I'm taking in.
Sure, I mean, I've got to be careful. You've got to remember that, I worked in television news. News is a commodity. They never come on at 6 o'clock and say, nothing happened today. We're going to play some gentle music in the background instead of having a program. So news is a manufactured, an artificial commodity where you create narratives and stories. And how do you get people to tune into that? Well, one of the ways you get people to tune in for that is make it bad news, because people will not tune in for good news. So if you'll notice on TV news that if they've got 20 seconds worth of footage, they'll just repeat the 20 seconds looping over and over again behind graphics and change the graphics sometimes. And they'll just loop it and loop it. The worst thing possible for news was 24-hour news, because there was sometimes barely enough news to fill an hour. It's news at 6, news at 10, and then an in-depth news night. But once you move to 24-hour news, the cycling of repeated stories over and over again. And I think that's why a lot of people just don't watch the news now. They will watch a program for a very short space of time, and then they switch off. And unfortunately, public broadcasting hasn't caught up really with it, because they're so hooked on the cycle they can't step away from it. So, if I see that same road in Iceland with a crack across the middle of the road, if I've seen it once, I've seen it, 200 times on news media, one crack across a road. Now, I know there's other things happening, but that's the only shot they've got. And don't forget, on television news, if you don't have a picture, it doesn't happen. It's not radio. So you can't tell a news story on television unless you've got a picture. And in a still picture, you need footage. So the news agenda, if you like, is totally shaped by the availability of footage. And of course, earthquakes are, have always happened. As I say, if you just look at the British Geological Survey, look at the American Survey. Having said that, there are some really big ones on the way, but not necessarily bigger than what's happened before. The Lisbon earthquake was in Portugal, was an enormous earthquake, and of course cities in those days weren't constructed around the idea of earthquakes. And so the devastation and the fire that took place after that was colossal. I think, I don't know how much of Lisbon went, but a huge amount of it. The Chicago fire that took place after an earthquake, once you had fractured gas pipes and things, fire becomes, enormous. And obviously everybody's aware of the San Andreas fault in California that will go at some point. What I can guarantee is when the San Andreas fault goes up, there'll be people saying it's the end of the world as we know it. Because that's the way we are. Every American newscaster will be doing it. There are other big ones as well, and clearly there's super volcanoes that are capable of going off at any time. In the Yellowstone Park in America, we talk about global warming being an issue because of too much heat. But if the super volcano goes off in Yellowstone, there'll be so little of the sun shining around the world, as the world's covered by ash and cloud, we'll be screaming out for more greenhouse gases. There's an irony. I'm not promoting it, incidentally. All I'm saying is that life is ironic at times, isn't it?
1816, after Mount Tambora erupted,
Yeah.
and they called it the year without sun.
The year without a sun. Yeah, no summer. Summer or sun? Without summer.
Because by the time the next year,
Because it had gone
particles
completely.
had circulated around the atmosphere. So
And of course, famine comes on the back of those things as well. But what we're going to see here, with these 4 horsemen out and about, is bigger than anything that we've seen up till now. Bigger than the Yellowstone Park, bigger than the San Andreas Fault, although they might have a part to play. What we're going to see next, and what I mean is the next time we do this together, we will start to see the impact of what it's like when these forces of the 4 horsemen are loosed, when the events take place. That's going to just radically reshape the planet. So there we go. All these will be surpassed. And the tribulation and the time of sorrows will have finally arrived. And there we go.
War hanging over us and the 4 minute warning
Yes.
for Farringdales and all that. They used to talk then about that if it came to that there would be a nuclear winter and the earth would cool down and the growing period when stuff could be cultivated would shorten by so many months or weeks or
Yes.
whatever, and there would be mass famine.
Yeah.
And I can remember that. There was no talk of global warming.
No.
It was all the threat of nuclear winter.
And not only that, but some climatologists were actually forecasting. I mean, I'm only talking 25 years ago.
Yeah.
A new ice age.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and don't get me wrong. I think we should not be burning fossil fuels and all that.
Mm.
You know, I think it's silly. If we can have smarter technology, let's have it. But there is a certain irony
Mm.
where everything moves from that side to that side to that side to back. You know, I'm waiting for the politician when we get a nuclear winter that turn around and says we need to reopen all the coal mines because we need to heat the planet up. That's a joke, by the way. Don't cancel me. I don't want to be cancelled for a joke. Even though I'm not funny, it's a joke. Anyhow, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yeah.
A quarter of the populations will be killed.
Yes.
Will that be sort of across the world, or do you think it'll be a certain area? Or
We're going to look at that exact question. Next time round. That was well done. The irony was it wasn't planned but looked like it. All right. Well, it is a 10 hooks one next time. That's a fair comment. Are we all okay? Bless you. Take care.